I was just about flat broke. I had been renting a sorry excuse for a bedroom that had more in common with a broom closet than your average accommodation. I had been living in that den for little more than 6 months, amongst an assortment of people who preferred a quick fix to their long list of problems. Needless to say, the nights were loud, and a pungent chemical smell always lingered in the common area. I had come to accept that this was the best I could hope for if I desired to live in the city. That being said, the area that I called home was more like the unwanted runoff of a city. It's hard to imagine a time when any one of the homes in this area was considered new. Perhaps they were like weeds that sprouted up when not enough care was given to their respective properties. Overgrown lawns, cracked pavement, and boarded-up windows made up the aesthetic of the place I called home. It didn't have to be this way. I knew that. I had a family with money. All I had to do was give the word, and I'm sure they would see that I was taken care of. Of course, I would have to go clean. Screw that. Their charity was less than desired, and we will leave it at that. Let's just say that I had more than enough scars before I started jabbing needles into my arm. I'd rather be out on the streets before I crawled back to those bloodsuckers. Sometimes I feel my thoughts directly translate into reality, or maybe I'm finding connections where there are none, but as fate would have it, I was evicted. All of us were evicted. Money exchanged hands somewhere, and the property was purchased. The city itself was already clean and pretty. The problem is, what does one do when there's nothing left to renovate downtown? Nowhere new to build. We had all heard the plans for a large development on Crowley Boulevard, but it was laughable. We figured our homes were a lost cause, too dirty for even the most desperate developers to want to touch. We were wrong. I was out on the street with nothing but a drawstring bag full of trinkets others would consider trash. My home, the room I spent just about every night blitzing out of my mind for the past few months, would probably become a cat cafe. The wind began to pick up as I sat on a sidewalk curb a few paces from where I once lived. White paint peeled off the wooden panels that made up the home, as a green shutter hung off to the side by one bolt from its solitary front window. The other shutter went missing when a member of our exclusive living arrangement tore it off in a rage during an episode on the front porch. I never knew what happens to that guy. Never even bothered to find out his name. Was too busy turning my brain to mush. I clutched my jacket against the incoming breeze. I guess I could just sit here and freeze to death. I don't think I would miss out on that much on this sorry excuse of a world. Then again, there was no point sniveling over that cesspool. There were plenty around I could turn to. Every other house in this neighborhood was abandoned, or at least appeared to be that way. I picked myself up and spent the rest of the afternoon scoping out places. Some were so run down and full of holes that there was little difference between sleeping inside and under a bridge. It still beat having no roof, which was something others were missing as well, with the entire house nearly caved in by the elements. The few times that I thought I had found a place, I would be chased out by those living inside. First come, first serve. I was ready to call it quits and make my way towards a shelter when I saw it sitting to the right of the park entrance. On the other side of it was a completely barren lot. It wasn't like the other homes in the neighborhood. At first glance, it didn't have anything extraordinary about it, but perhaps that was it. It didn't fit. It wasn't run down or covered in the grime and wear that marked every building in this area. It wasn't a palace or anything, but it was unfazed by its surroundings. Someone had to be living there. Approaching it would probably have been a waste of my time, yet I continued forward. I stopped at the curb in front of the property. A paved walkway led to the set of concrete steps connected to a small landing with a front door. One or two cracks were noticeable in the pavement, but They were filled in, and recently, if I had to have guessed. The grass on either side of the path looked healthy enough, if not somewhat overgrown. Why was I taking all of this in? Just hurry up and check the house, I told myself under my breath. As the day was rapidly turning into night, it was only getting colder. I walked the pathway and descended the concrete steps. A bright red door stood tall in front of me. I examined my reflection in the brass doorknob. It had been a while since I had a shower or shaved, and it was showing. I exhaled and rapped my knuckles against the door. I stood in anticipation. Nothing. I waited a few moments, then knocked again. I looked around me. No one was in sight. I shivered as the wind pierced my skin. Abandoned or not, I was done searching. I would take my chances and stay the night. I tried the doorknob. Locked, as to be expected. I could break through the front window, but I didn't want to make my entrance that obvious to any potential patrols. I descended the steps and went around the side of the house. As I walked towards the back, I spotted a small window peering out just above from where the house met the ground. I could get in through the basement. That was an option. Back door first. I arrived at a wooden gate, reaching my hand over the top, and found the mechanism to unlock it. Not a barred window or padlock so far. It was as if the entire house was lifted from a different neighborhood and dropped here. I entered the backyard. My eyes were met with the finely cut grass and a barbecue pit. The somewhat idyllic quality of it all was weirding me out. I approached the back door. A glass pane was embedded in the center of it. I could easily burst through and unlock it from the inside. I began to wrap my fist in my coat when I felt the urge to stop. I stared at the doorknob, same one as on the front door. I reached down and grasped it. I turned it. No resistance. Unbelievable. Whoever lived here had left the back door unlocked. I accepted that fact as an invitation and let myself in. The house was deceptively dark inside. I fumbled through my bag until my fingers grazed a penlight at the bottom. I reached in deeper and retrieved it. I flicked it on and a small beam cut through the darkness. As I panned the light across the room, it revealed a small kitchen leading directly into a living room. The cupboards and countertops were in immaculate condition, and the living room was fully furnished. I couldn't shake the thought that someone was still living there. Didn't matter. I had already decided on staying the night. I exhaled a plume of breath, obscuring my light source. It was as cold inside as it was outside. Arguably colder. I walked slowly across the tile floor, running my hand against the wall. My fingers collided with a faceplate of a switch. I flicked it. Nothing. I continued into the living room. A sofa and a recliner angled themselves to face an out-of-date tube TV in the far right corner of the room. Even if you could lift that thing out of here, it would be worthless. Slivers of the outside world escaped inside from the blinds of a large window behind one of the sofas. To the left of the window was the entrance. A simple lock held the door in place. Not even a deadbolt sat upon the bold red door. I shivered. My eyes darted further left towards a hallway. A little box sat on the wall at its opening. The thermostat. I approached it and went to adjust the dial. It was cranked. The power was out. Of course, heating wouldn't be an option. I decided it would be best to search for some blankets, sheets, towels, or anything to warm myself up. I had ample time to search for valuables later. I navigated down the corridor, my footfalls silenced by the carpet below me, save for the occasional squeak of an aging floorboard. I was surrounded by 3 white doors where the hallway ended. With no particular bias other than its proximity, I chose to enter the one to my left. I winced as the floor creaked heavily in front of the door frame under my weight. My hand grasped the doorknob and twisted as I pushed the door open. Once inside, I swept the room with my light. The beam passed a large bed, and I immediately froze. I saw something. My light remained locked to the carpets before the bed. I broke the trance and raised the light back to the bed. An inviting plush duvet sat upon it, and nothing more. I'm not sure what I thought I saw, but something in my brain lit up like a Christmas tree. The hairs on my arm were standing on end, and I wasn't confident that it was simply the cold. Something in me forbade the use of the blankets or sheets from that bed. The thought of spending the night in it unsettled me. The entire room had an ambience to it that I couldn't quite place, but was something I gladly removed myself from. Reluctantly, I withdrew my light from the bed and shone it towards a drawer across the room. I approached it. 2 larger cabinets with swinging doors sat atop 3 smaller pull-out drawers. I grabbed the handles of the top compartment and opened it. Folded clothing sat on top of one another. As I reached for it, I froze. A noise caught my attention, one that I did not make. Somewhere, behind me, off in the house, a hinge moved. I held my breath. Was someone else in here? I brought my bag out in front of me and reached inside until I found my small utility knife and pulled it out. I flicked it open. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it will have to do. With my knife in one hand and a pen light in the other, I carefully approached the door. I stopped just shy of the loose floorboard. I leaned out of the room and quickly aimed the flashlight to my left down the hallway. The other 2 rooms were still closed. I rapidly switched angles to peer into the living room. I couldn't quite make out the entire area from my position. Someone could easily be hiding on either side of the hallway. I took a large stride over the loose floorboard and cautiously proceeded down the hallway. I braced myself and stepped into the living room. No one was waiting for me there. I eased up a bit. The main entrance was still closed. My attention shifted. The back door. The owners may have returned. Otherwise, someone else could have had the same idea as me and wished to hunker down for the night. Simple enough. If they're friendly, then we could work something out. If they're not, well, that's what the knife is for. My hand throbbed slightly due to the vice grip that I held over my sad pocket knife. I kept the flashlight trained on the floor. Whoever was in here could easily spot my light glowing in the living room. I could only make out the edge of the kitchen. I slowly inhaled, then exhaled. Clouds of my breath once again flew in front of my face. I leapt into the entrance of the kitchen and shone my light while brandishing my knife. The back door was closed, and no one was in the kitchen. To the right of where I stood, a charcoal black door was wide open. I took a few moments to process what I was seeing. I swore I had run my hand along that wall earlier. All I felt was the light switch. I did not feel a door, yet there it was. My heart was in my throat. The door was opened directly outwards, blocking my vision of the entrance or anyone that might be in it. I wanted to run, but the outside was only getting darker and colder. I crept past the granite countertops and towards the door to get a better look. Working up my courage, I peered past it and shined my light into the darkness. Through the entrance was a stairway leading down. The basement. Had someone broken into the basement window? I didn't hear any glass shatter. I stepped into the doorway and illuminated the path ahead with my penlight. In a narrow, unfinished corridor, the wooden stairs led to a landing that abruptly turned right and continued downward. I exhaled and proceeded forward. The stairs warped and creaked in protest of every step I took during my descent into the basement. If someone was hiding down there, they would surely hear me coming. I came to the landing and stopped just short of it, half expecting the other intruder to be hiding just around the corner, ready to pounce. I prepared my knife. Time slowed as I held my position. In my head, the standoff continued. Me with my knife and penlight on one side, while the new guest crouched just around the corner, brandishing a rusty pipe and intentionally watching the beam of light hover unsteadily against the corridor wall. Without another moment of hesitation, I flung myself around the corner, with my knife raised, ready to strike. No one was on the stairs. My light cascaded across the barren cement floor. I sighed in relief and cautiously walked down the steps and into the basement. Darkness enveloped me. I scanned along the uppermost section of the wall until I came across the basement window on my left. It was unharmed and seemed to be locked. Night had fallen. Did the door open by itself? More importantly, how did I miss it entirely earlier? I was overthinking things again. Paranoia. Stranger things have happened. I had just missed it in the dark. Maybe a draft from somewhere blew it open. Would have explained why it was so cold. Except, it wasn't cold. Why was the basement not cold? I shined my light around the room. It was mostly full of labeled cardboard boxes. Probably just a bunch of garbage that, for one reason or another, had some sentimental value. Boilers and cleaning products lined the neighboring side of the room. As I swung my flashlight, a faint glimmer caught my eye. I brought my flashlight back into position to get another look. Facing the stairs, a small metallic rectangle sat on the ground a few steps to the left. I put my knife away in my bag and approached it, picking it up. It was a butane lighter. Almost as soon as I lifted the lighter, my penlight died. I had just put a new battery in it that afternoon. I slapped it against my hand a few times in a half-hearted effort. I tossed it across the room in frustration. It cracked against the concrete floor and rolled away in the dark. The coincidental timing of my light dying and the discovery of the lighter was not lost on me. I swatted the thought away from my mind. If this thing was busted, then I would likely spend the rest of the night in the pitch black due to my little outburst. I flipped the top open and flicked the flint wheel. A tall flame erupted from the lighter and illuminated my surroundings in an orange glow. I stood in place, my eyes transfixed on what was directly ahead of me. My mind, something inside me, was telling me to run. I began to sweat, and my breath became shallow. I was looking at a wall, just a wall. But something was on that wall. Just dirt, markings. Probably cosmetic damage caused by someone reorganizing down here, scraping against it. But the shapes, they were too well defined. They were silhouettes of people. A man, a woman, and a child. Their outlines were shockingly different. Every cufflink, ripple of a dress, and hair was painstakingly detailed. Was this painted on the wall? I walked towards it for closer inspection. I approached the woman in the center. I fought against myself as my brain shouted for me to leave. Extending my index finger, I lightly dragged it across the forehead of the silhouette. I pulled it back and inspected it. A black dust coated my fingertip. I rubbed it between my fingers and sniffed it. Soot. How the hell did this happen? In my left ear, I heard a rapid inhale, then exhale through tightened lips. My lighter went out. Someone was here. Someone was in the basement and blew out the lighter. My heartbeat quickened. I carefully shifted my bag and reached my left hand inside. I couldn't find my knife. I had just put it inside a moment prior. Had someone managed to take it in that brief time? I stopped moving. My hand trembled as it gripped the lighter, my thumb resting on the flint wheel. I didn't dare move a muscle, as if I could save myself through stillness alone. I shivered uncomfortably. It was cold again. I suddenly noticed the numbness of my face as my throat strained against the cold air. I gathered enough courage to ignite the lighter. I flicked once, and sparks flew, but no flame arose. I flicked again, and there were no results. I cursed my luck, tried a third time, and a small geyser of flame erupted from the lighter. The orange glow threw itself over my surroundings to reveal I was no longer in the basement. I stood in the center of the kitchen, facing the back wall. My knees felt weak. I had no recollection of climbing back up the stairs. This was impossible. Through the glass pane of the door, I could see nothing. Beyond the house was a darkness far greater than what I had ever witnessed before. Something that anywhere remotely close to the city was not capable of. A darkness that I feared I would not return from if I entered. The sound of a plate smashing came directly behind me. I spun around in a panic to see the origin of the noise. Nothing was there. I was staring at a countertop with cupboards. A stove sat nearby it, along with a fridge and dishwasher. Then, I heard crying. I concentrated on my breathing, trying to stay calm. I realized that something was causing shadows in the lighter's aura. Something that wasn't there. Yet, two silhouettes were cast on the wall of the kitchen. One of a woman, gripping her hand, and a man sympathetically approaching her. She shivered and tensed up as he approached her. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. But you should have known by now that when you do that, it makes me very upset," he said, in a quiet and patronizing tone. He seemed to bite every other word. The light closed in on the shadows and suffocated them until they were no longer visible. The sound of a door closing drew my attention back to the rear entrance. I shone the light to reveal a shadow of a female figure standing by the door. A different male figure stood by it. "I can't keep doing this," she said, her voice echoing as if in a grand hall. "Then come with me," the youthful male voice said from miles away. "It's not that simple," she said, choking back tears. The shadows withered away under the beam of light. Laughter blurted out from a nearby table. I directed my lighter in its direction. Carved into the light was the silhouette of a child, a girl, seated at the head of the table. "Blow out the candles, Riley," a sea of voices shouted. The light was extinguished by a gust of wind, plunging me back into darkness. I desperately began striking the flint wheel. Sparks flew out from in front of me. Finally, after several attempts, the lighter ignited. I was no longer in the kitchen. In the dim light, I could make out a dollhouse and plush toys lining a wall. Inspecting the wall itself, it was covered in a cheap wallpaper that depicted a vista of castles, rainbows, unicorns, and caricatures of medieval princesses and knights. The sound of fabric being adjusted caused me to turn around. In front of me was a small bed with flamboyant pink sheets. A plush bear was nestled between two purple pillows. Shapes moved in the dim luminance. I raised my lighter closer to the scene. In the shadows, the girl was on the bed. A man sat on the foot of the bed. "Is everything all right?" the girl said, unsure of herself. "Sorry, sweetie. "What was that?" the man said, turning his head. His voice remained monotone.
You and Mommy, you were yelling. Is everything all right?
Her voice trembled, audibly upset. "Yes, everything is fine," he spoke coldly.
You and Mommy aren't going to leave each other?
She said, holding back snivels. "No, we are going to be together forever," he said solemnly.
Really?
Her voice steadying. "I'll see to it." The words came out of his mouth as a whisper. The shadows once again collapsed upon themselves, and I was left alone. How was I moving around the house, and what exactly was I seeing? The flame extinguished, and the room dropped away from me. I struck the flint wheel, and as the flame appeared, it revealed the master bedroom. It was the one I had entered looking for warmth. I was staring down directly at the bed. I saw nothing, but could hear the sounds of lovers embracing. I took a few steps to my right and raised the lighter again. Projecting against the wall was a shadow morphing as the shape of two people made whole. A floorboard creaked. I turned my head. Another shadow stood in the doorway. The shadow on the bed broke into two.
"Did you really take me for being that stupid?"
The voice escaped from the doorway like a hiss.
I'm sorry. I just feel...
She was immediately cut off.
"I don't care how you feel. Answer me. How stupid do you think I am?"
His voice rose and shook.
I don't think that. I never thought that.
Her voice choked with tears.
"You thought I wouldn't notice the back door being left unlocked, so surely you must think I'm stupid."
His voice bounced around the room with rage.
Perhaps it would be best if I left.
The other shadow on the bed spoke, slowly leaning upwards.
"No, you are right where you're supposed to be. You and her are going to lie in the bed you made."
The man snarled. The shadow began to rise from the bed. The woman reached out after it.
"Maybe what we did here was wrong, but that doesn't make what you put her through any less cruel. I've seen the bruises. You don't have a wife. You have a hostage. I'm leaving, and for her sake, I hope she does the same."
As the shadow finished speaking, the one in the doorway charged it. The woman's screams echoed in the distance. The husband grabbed the other shadow and slammed its head against the nearest wall. A sickening thud made my skin crawl as the silhouette collapsed to the ground. As the shadow lay on the ground, the husband approached and stood over it. It raised its right foot upwards.
Don't!
The wife screamed, reaching out towards him. The husband's shadow repeatedly raised its foot up and down onto the other man's head. Each time, its impact transitioned more from the cracking of bone to a mushier, gut-wrenching sound. I watched the morbid shadow play in horror, unable to avert my eyes. The wife trembled in terror on the bed. The man remained silent, then turned to face the bed. He climbed on top of it and approached his wife.
No, get away from me.
She screamed helplessly. Its hands reached around her throat and pinned her body against the backboard of the bed. Her hands flailed around, and her words were reduced to guttural pleas for help. I willed myself to move my legs and run towards the scene, dropping the lighter in the process. I reached out towards them, but it was futile. I could not touch them. They were somewhere else, and whatever this was, it was just an echo. I turned to look away. The lighter continued to burn where I had dropped it, lying on its side, beginning to burn the carpet. The sound of struggle disappeared behind me. I did not wish to see the aftermath of the scene. I approached the lighter and knelt down to pick it up. Before I could, the flame extinguished and I was plunged into darkness. A flicker of light came to life behind me. I turned around. I could hardly process the dread that consumed me. I was in the basement. The lighter was lit and floating a few paces from the stairs. The light projected the shadows of the wife and daughter. They appeared to be bound together. Muffled cries spewed out. The lighter cast a shadow on the ground. That of a man. The husband.
We're going to be together. I told you that. I made a promise,
he said, maniacally in between tears. I panicked. There had to be something I could do.
Oh God, please, anything. Why was this happening? I love you both so much,
he said, almost remorsefully. I looked at the wall. Beyond the shadow, there was nothing. The soot silhouettes were not there. The lighter fell to the ground. The shape of a man erupted in flames, accompanied by blood-curdling screams. A trail of flame rapidly advanced towards the wall, and two seated figures were set alight. In moments, the entire room was engulfed in flames. Screams came from every direction as smoke clouded my vision. The man fell to the ground as the mother and child writhed in pain as they were bound to their chairs. As the fire encroached upon me, I managed to snap out of my daze. I looked towards the stairs. I made a dash towards them as the fire spread at an unnatural speed. I heard the sound of wood cracking as the flames ravaged the foundations of the building. I made it into the kitchen and faced the rear entrance. A section of the ceiling collapsed. It narrowly missed me as I threw myself backwards. My head collided with the countertop. Stunned, I put a hand on the back of my head. It felt warm and sticky. I had to stay focused. I pulled myself up against the counter. Half the kitchen was reduced to burning rubble, blocking off the basement and back entrance. There was still the front door. I stepped to my side and slipped slightly, catching myself at the last minute. I was beginning to black out. I hit my head pretty hard, and the smoke was not helping. I turned towards the living room and approached the door. Inexplicably, a geyser of flame erupted in front of it as I went for the lock. I immediately changed course towards the window and prepared to throw myself out of it. A wall of flame rose in front of it as if reacting to my thoughts. I was surrounded by hellfire. I was forced to retreat down the hallway as the flames followed me. They wrapped themselves along the walls on both sides. The only clear path was the door at the end of the hallway. I used my last reserved energy to push through the door and shut it behind me. Then, there was darkness. Somehow, the door kept the fire at bay. I could see nothing. I was in absolute darkness. There wasn't even the slightest amount of illumination coming through the doorframe. Then, there was a blazing light in the corner of the room. I looked upon it and screamed. When they found me, I was on the verge of hypothermia, screaming and convulsing on the ground. They were forced to restrain me to prevent further self-harm. From what I had been told, the back of my head was bleeding pretty heavily. I had nestled myself inside the ruins of a house that had been condemned by the city. It had experienced serious fire damage and didn't even have a roof. After they found my stash bag, most of my claims were chalked up to another psychedelic episode from a junkie. My family was contacted, and after a stint in the hospital, I was thrown into rehab. Though I was bitter, I can't say it didn't do some good. I got clean, and for the first time in as far as I can remember, I made friends whose common interests weren't just shooting up. After a while, I moved on. At least, I told myself I did. I lost a lot of sleep thinking about what I saw. What I thought I saw, as the shrink put it. I should have left it alone, but that was never in the cards. It was 6 months later when I had another episode, this time in a public library. I blacked out. Supposedly, I wouldn't stop screaming. Cops had to restrain me again. Now they got me on some monitored living arrangement. But I remember what I saw. I had done some research, began looking into obituaries, death, and fires. I knew what I was going to find, but I was never going to be prepared for it. I found what I was looking for. I found the house, the fire, and the family who perished in it. Above all else, I found a picture. And in the picture, I saw a little girl with amber eyes. The same amber eyes that looked back at me in that room. In her room. They stared at me as the flesh surrounding them bubbled and burnt away from the flames, and the lips below them formed words. I'm cold.